They say love knows no age, but what they don't say is that the heart doesn't forget. After 60, love comes with layers, memories that linger, fears that have solidified, and hopes that still burn quietly under the surface. Falling in love at this stage of life can be electric and liberating, yet the risks are real and rarely spoken aloud. What if the person you open up to isn't ready to hold the weight of your history? What if your well-earned solitude becomes a fragile thing, easily shattered by emotional dependency or disappointment? And most importantly, what if love, instead of healing, reopens wounds you thought were long buried? In this video, we will explore the silent, often overlooked challenges of late-life love, revealing the emotional undercurrents that Jungian psychology helps us bring into the light. If you're ready to face truth over fantasy, comment below. I choose love with awareness. Carl Jung believed that our psychological development continues throughout life, and that later years offer a unique opportunity for profound transformation. When it comes to falling in love after 60, Jungian principles offer essential insights into the unseen layers of this experience. Jung emphasized the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole by integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of the psyche. In the context of late-life love, this means that relationships are no longer just about companionship or passion. They become mirrors reflecting back our unfinished inner work. One of the most powerful forces in any relationship is projection. After 60, projections can become more entrenched, often idealizing a partner as a redeemer or fearing them as a threat to long-earned independence. These projections may be rooted in unresolved earlier relationships, unmet childhood needs, or even grief from past losses. The risk here is mistaking emotional intensity for true connection, blinding oneself to the subtle cues of imbalance or incompatibility. Jung also spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we hide or deny. In older age, the shadow might consist of regrets, fears of irrelevance, or shame around aging. Love can trigger these elements, bringing them to the surface. If unacknowledged, the shadow may sabotage intimacy or cause us to retreat from vulnerability. Finally, the integration of the inner masculine and feminine, the animus and anima, is vital. In later years, the need for inner balance becomes more pressing. Falling in love may stir long-suppressed yearnings, but unless these inner archetypes are recognized and harmonized, we risk depending on our partner to fulfill what only we can cultivate within. Jungian psychology doesn't warn against love after 60, but it does insist that we enter it with deep awareness and the courage to face our own psyche. In the autumn of life, love can feel like a gentle return to something lost, a kind of homecoming. But underneath that warmth often lies a hidden burden, the emotional baggage accumulated over decades. Unlike the fresh openness of youth, later life love carries echoes from the past, sometimes whispering and sometimes shouting. Every previous heartbreak, betrayal, abandonment, or unfulfilled longing doesn't simply disappear with age. It settles into the psyche and waits, often unnoticed, until intimacy stirs it awake. Falling in love after 60 can bring to the surface deeply buried emotions that were never fully processed. The loss of a spouse, a bitter divorce, estranged relationships with children, or even unresolved trauma from childhood may re-emerge. This emotional residue doesn't always show up directly. It can manifest as mistrust, hesitance to fully open one's heart, or an unconscious fear that joy will be short-lived. Jung understood this well. He taught that what is not brought to consciousness comes back as fate. In relationships, this means that old wounds we refuse to examine quietly shape our patterns and decisions. Often people think that age grants immunity from emotional confusion, that with time clarity automatically comes. But in truth, time only gives more material to carry, unless one actively reflects and heals. Many older adults enter relationships hoping that a new connection will finally fix what previous ones couldn't. This is a dangerous illusion. Without understanding what we bring with us, we risk reenacting the same dynamics, merely with a new face. There is also the challenge of comparison. After 60, love doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is measured consciously or unconsciously against what came before. A new partner might be compared to a lost spouse, an ex, or even an idealized figure who never truly existed. This comparison can make genuine connection difficult, as the present becomes overshadowed by the past. The new relationship, instead of being allowed to grow on its own terms, is filtered through emotional templates that distort reality. Jung's concept of the complex is relevant here. A complex is a cluster of emotions, memories, and associations surrounding a particular theme, like abandonment, betrayal, or rejection. These complexes are triggered in relationships, and they operate autonomously, often hijacking our responses. An innocent comment from a partner might suddenly awaken a flood of emotional reaction disproportionate to the moment. This is not just sensitivity, it is a past wound demanding attention. Without awareness, one may blame the partner rather than recognizing that the pain belongs to an earlier chapter. There is also the question of identity. By 60, many people have constructed a solid sense of self, often shaped by roles: parent, spouse, professional, caregiver. Love has the power to unsettle that identity. Suddenly, one is no longer just an individual, but part of a romantic dynamic again. This can be both exhilarating and frightening. For someone who has grown comfortable in solitude or in self-reliance, the emotional exposure of intimacy can feel risky. The old stories, "I'm too old for this," "It's not worth the trouble," "It won't last anyway," begin to surface, not as truth, but as defense. Yet it is precisely here that transformation is possible. Jung believed that later life was not about decline, but about integration. When emotional baggage is brought into awareness, it becomes a source of wisdom rather than sabotage. It allows one to love not from a place of lack, but from fullness. Instead of seeking someone to complete them, a person who has confronted their own emotional echoes enters love as a conscious choice, not a desperate need. The risk, then, is not love itself, but unconscious love, the kind that repeats old patterns while expecting new outcomes. When we unpack the emotional history we carry, we reclaim the ability to relate from the present moment. This is where authentic connection begins, not in forgetting the past, but in understanding how it lives within us. Falling in love after 60 may open wounds, but it also offers the rare gift of healing them, not through avoidance, but through mindful, courageous presence. In the later chapters of life, when one has already lived through love, loss, and transformation, a new romantic connection can feel like a surprising resurgence of possibility. It's easy to interpret this experience as the long-awaited answer to the soul's deepest longings, a final, comforting completion to one's journey. But Jung's perspective challenges this idea. He warned of the danger of believing another person can complete us. This belief often masks the more subtle and powerful psychological mechanism of projection. Projection occurs when we unconsciously assign our own internal qualities, positive or negative, onto another person. In romantic relationships, this is especially potent. A person in their 60s or beyond may project idealized traits onto a new partner: compassion, strength, wisdom, sensuality, or even salvation. The illusion of completion emerges when one unconsciously believes that this person will heal what was broken, provide what was missing, or fulfill what was never fully lived. But this is not true connection, it is fantasy cloaked in emotion. Jung taught that projections left unchecked create distorted realities. The person being loved is not being seen for who they truly are, but for the archetypal image they have awakened within the psyche. In Jungian terms, this may be the projection of the anima, the inner feminine in men, or the animus, the inner masculine in women. These inner figures are deeply symbolic, shaped by personal experience, collective myths, and unmet psychological needs. When projected onto a partner, they generate intense feelings of attraction, urgency, or even destiny. For example, a woman who has long denied her need for assertiveness may project strength and decisiveness onto a male partner, believing he completes her. A man who has suppressed emotional vulnerability may fall in love with a nurturing woman and feel an overwhelming sense of coming home. While these connections may feel profound, they are often more about inner dynamics than genuine compatibility. Over time, as reality asserts itself and the partner fails to live up to the unconscious ideal, disappointment sets in. This moment, when the projection begins to dissolve, is a critical point. One either turns away, blaming the partner, or turns inward, asking, "What part of myself was I truly reaching for?" This is the transformational opportunity that projection provides. If recognized, projection becomes a doorway to self-awareness. The traits we admire or desire in another are clues to our own unlived life. Falling in love later in life, then, is not simply a return to romantic fulfillment, but an invitation to retrieve lost parts of ourselves. The partner is not the missing half, but the mirror. The illusion of completion is especially strong when loneliness has become normalized. After decades of self-sufficiency, one may long for deep emotional connection and mistake this longing for destiny. But this desire, if unmet internally, becomes dangerous when externalized. No one can carry the burden of being another's emotional completion. When a partner is expected to fill the gaps of decades, the relationship is built not on mutual presence, but on emotional dependency. Moreover, projection also has a darker side. Just as we project the ideal, we also project the shadow, the unwanted parts of ourselves. In a later life relationship, we may begin by seeing the other as perfect, only to turn and see them as controlling, selfish, or cold when they fail to meet our unconscious expectations. The shift from idealization to disillusionment is swift and painful, especially when one is not aware that the disappointment originates within. Jungian psychology doesn't reject love, it seeks to deepen it. Real intimacy begins when we withdraw projections and see the other not as a fantasy, but as a complex, evolving individual. In this way, love becomes a container for growth, not a substitute for it, and the sense of completion, ironically, is found not in another, but in the process of becoming more whole within ourselves. To love after 60 with awareness means recognizing when you are falling in love with a person, and when you are falling into your own dream. Only by distinguishing the two can we move beyond illusion into real connection, where two conscious souls meet not to complete each other, but to walk beside each other with clarity and presence. By the time a person reaches 60, solitude often transforms from an uncomfortable void into a source of strength. After years, sometimes decades, of navigating relationships, caretaking, loss, and growth, solitude can feel like a hard-earned peace. It holds a rhythm, a self-governed pace, and an emotional autonomy that many are reluctant to disrupt. Yet love, by its nature, disrupts. It invites another presence into that carefully tended space. And with that invitation arises a central tension of late-life relationships, the delicate balance between preserving independence and opening fully to intimacy. Carl Jung viewed the second half of life as a time for inner development, when the ego must step back and make space for the self, the deeper, wiser core of who we are. In this phase, solitude becomes a crucible for individuation. It allows for reflection, self-inquiry, and the integration of the parts we've neglected or rejected. For many, this internal work becomes sacred. So when love re-enters the picture, it doesn't just bring joy, it brings risk. The risk of losing one's center, of blurring the boundaries between self and other, of compromising the integrity of a life carefully shaped by years of healing and self-discovery. For someone who has embraced solitude, falling in love can provoke a subtle resistance. Questions surface. Will I lose myself again? Will this person understand the value of my inner world? Will I be forced to compromise rhythms and rituals that keep me grounded? This resistance isn't fear of love, it's fear of losing hard-won freedom. And it's valid, but it can also be a barrier. Jung teaches that we must integrate, not eliminate, opposing forces. Solitude and intimacy are not enemies. They can coexist, but only when brought into conscious relationship. Intimacy in later life often requires redefining what closeness looks like. It may not mean cohabitation or merging lives entirely. Instead, it may mean emotional availability, shared values, and the ability to hold space for one another without erasing the boundaries of the self. This type of intimacy is less about dependency and more about resonance. It recognizes the autonomy of both partners as essential, not optional. It also requires deep communication, vulnerability, and the willingness to renegotiate what connection means at this stage of life. Independence in this context is not about isolation, it's about rootedness. It's knowing who you are and not abandoning that self for the sake of pleasing another. Many older adults carry wounds from past relationships where compromise turned into self-erasure. The fear of repeating that pattern is often strong, but avoiding intimacy altogether out of self-protection can lead to another kind of loss. The loss of relational growth, the softening of the heart, the joy of being seen in one's fullness. There is also the cultural myth that love requires sacrifice of selfhood, that to be in a relationship means giving up personal space, routines, preferences, or dreams. But Jungian insight suggests the opposite. The more individuated a person becomes, the more whole they are within themselves, the more capable they are of truly relating to another, not out of need, but out of abundance. Intimacy then becomes not a threat to solitude, but an enhancement of it, a place where two complete beings choose day after day to share their inner worlds without consuming one another. This kind of conscious relationship demands maturity, clarity, and the courage to establish boundaries without building walls. It means being honest about what you need to feel grounded and being open to your partner's needs without losing yourself in them. It also means making peace with the fact that love might not look the same as it did decades ago, and that's not a failure, it's evolution. To love after 60 is to walk a fine line between openness and preservation, but when approached with awareness, it becomes a dance between two deeply rooted souls, each honoring the other's space, while also allowing space for togetherness. In this dance, intimacy doesn't threaten independence, it gives it a reason to breathe. Aging, in the collective psyche, is often cloaked in silence and avoidance. Society tends to glorify youth while pushing the later years to the margins, casting them as a period of decline, irrelevance, or loss. Yet from a Jungian perspective, aging is not a descent but a sacred passage, a time when the soul seeks completion, integration, and meaning beyond external achievement. However, love during this phase often awakens a complex interplay of emotions that are tied not just to the partner, but to the self's evolving relationship with age, mortality, and legacy. Beneath the surface of romantic connection lies the shadow of aging, and it must be faced. Jung described the shadow as the unconscious aspect of the personality that the ego refuses to identify with. It contains all that we deny, repress, or disown. In the context of aging, the shadow may include fears of being unwanted, shame around physical changes, regret over missed opportunities, or anxiety about death. When falling in love after 60, these hidden fears can be stirred unexpectedly. A touch, a compliment, a moment of vulnerability may evoke not just pleasure but grief. Grief for the body that once was, for time lost, for the future that is no longer infinite. The danger arises when these emotions are not acknowledged. They begin to leak into the relationship in disguised forms: insecurity, control, emotional withdrawal, or overcompensation. One may become overly self-sacrificing in a desperate attempt to feel needed. Another may keep emotional distance to avoid the terror of being left or outlived. These behaviors are not about the partner, they are about the shadow, trying to protect the fragile ego from confronting uncomfortable truths. To truly love at this stage, one must turn inward. The integration of the shadow becomes essential, not only for personal wholeness, but for the health of the relationship. This process involves naming and facing the fears that accompany aging: fear of becoming invisible, of being a burden, of not being enough. It means grieving what has passed without bitterness. It means seeing beauty in the now, not by denying the changes of age, but by accepting them as part of the fullness of being. Jung emphasized that the second half of life should not be governed by the same goals as the first. If the earlier years are about building identity, relationships, and achievement, the later years are about spiritual depth, authenticity, and self-integration. In this light, romantic love becomes a vessel, not just for pleasure or companionship, but for psychological maturation. It offers a mirror through which one can confront the parts of the self still hidden or fragmented. For example, a person who has always defined themselves by youth and attractiveness may struggle deeply when intimacy at 60 or 70 reflects back a different image. They may feel unworthy of love, despite the emotional richness they now carry. Unless this unconscious belief is brought into awareness, it will quietly undermine the connection, producing behaviors of jealousy, insecurity, or withdrawal. Integration then means learning to love, not despite aging, but through it. It's about recognizing that one's value no longer lies in external validation, but in inner radiance, emotional depth, and spiritual presence. Another common shadow aspect is unresolved regret. A lifetime of choices leaves behind a trail of what-ifs. Lovers lost, paths not taken, forgiveness not given. These ghosts can haunt new love, casting shadows of doubt or holding the heart hostage to past pain. The call then is to make peace with the past, not by rewriting it, but by weaving it into the fabric of who you are today. Only then can you offer yourself fully to another, not as a fragmented soul seeking healing, but as an integrated being capable of authentic presence. In this way, love after 60 becomes an alchemical fire. It burns away illusion, strips away pretense, and reveals the truth of who you are beneath all the roles you've played. If you are willing to face the shadow, to bring it into the light of consciousness, love can become not a regression to youthful fantasy, but a portal to conscious union. And through that union, both inner and outer, you don't just share life with another, you become more fully yourself. Falling in love after 60 is not a retreat into sentimentality or a desperate grasp for youth. It is, when approached with consciousness, one of the most profound psychological and spiritual journeys available. It demands more than emotion. It calls for awareness, inner clarity, and the courage to face both the past and the self. Unlike the loves of earlier years, this stage is less about passion and more about presence, less about completion and more about reflection. It is here that Jungian wisdom becomes essential, illuminating how projection, shadow, individuation, and inner balance shape not only who we love, but how we love. When we enter love in later life without illusions, we gain the rare opportunity to integrate old wounds, honor solitude, and share our evolving self, not from emptiness, but from wholeness. This isn't a risk-free path, but it is deeply rewarding. The risk isn't love itself, it's entering love unconsciously without doing the inner work that makes real intimacy possible. If you found value in this exploration, subscribe to the channel and watch the video that just appeared on your screen. It continues this journey into conscious relationships and self-transformation. Your path doesn't end here. It may just be beginning,